I pledge allegiance to the flag
of
the United States of America and to the republic
for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call. Claudia,
Here.
Alan,
Here.
John,
Here.
Tracy Ellen. Tracy Ellen,
She did say she would not be here tonight.
Doug,
Here.
Barbara,
Here.
Joe,
Here.
Stephanie,
Here.
and Al.
Here.
Student representatives, Jesse,
He's not.
Jesse will not be here tonight.
Noel,
Here.
and Joshua.
Here.
Ladies and gentlemen, the New Jersey Open Public Meetings Law was enacted to ensure the right of the public to have advance notice and to attend the meetings of public bodies at which any business affecting their interests is discussed or acted upon. In accordance with provision of this act, the Riverdale Regional Board of Education has caused notice of this meeting to be publicized by having the date, time, and place thereof sent to the record, the Ridgewood News, and the town newspapers, the constituent borough clerks and borough libraries, as well as posting in the school district's principal's offices, faculty rooms, and board office. According to New Jersey Public Law 2001, Chapter 226, the smoking or use of any tobacco product is strictly prohibited anywhere in the public school buildings or anywhere in school grounds, including but not limited to parking lots, grassy areas, and athletic fields. Violators will be subject to a fine not to exceed $100.
Claudia?
Sure. The mission of the Riverdale Regional School District is, excuse me, to provide a safe, student-centered environment in which each student is valued and respected, to challenge each student to reach his or her potential, to nurture every student's intellectual, social, physical, and emotional growth, to promote a healthy work ethic, a passion for learning, and a respect for oneself and others, to develop responsible citizens for a diverse community and ever-changing world, to continue to involve our community in an active partnership, and to provide all students the opportunity to achieve and exceed the New Jersey Student Learning Standards, and the New Jersey Core Curriculum Content Standards.
Okay, thank you, Claudia. We now come to the public comment section of the agenda on agenda items only. There will be a segment at the end of the meeting for public comments on anything outside of the listed regular agenda. Mark will moderate this section. So Mark, are there any public comments?
Yeah, any comments? If you have any, please raise your hand or send a message in the comments.
Okay, I didn't think so.
No comments, yeah.
Okay, we have a presentation tonight. We want to welcome Vincent DeLucia from New Jersey School Boards. We have seen Mr. DeLucia many times live. This is the first time virtually. Vinny is well experienced with over 34 years in school district experience, so it's all yours.
Well, thank you, everybody. It's certainly glad to see you again. I always enjoy coming back to see your board. Now, let me take a moment to share my screen. And as I'm doing that, I also want to applaud you for reading your mission statement at the beginning of this meeting. I just think that's terrific. And it really does help center us and remind us of what we're doing and why we're here, to say the least. So as you know, I'm Vince DeLucia with school boards. I've been there almost 10 years. To start out just really with a little bit of trivia and a photo I took just last summer. If you're familiar with Seaside Heights and Ortley Beach, there's a little beach on the bay which is called Sunset Beach. And until about 100 years ago, it was actually the third inlet from the ocean. The Cranberry Inlet, you have Manasquan to the north, we have Barnegat Light to the south, and this used to be the Cranberry Inlet, which is filled in over the course of time, despite the efforts of others, laborers who tried to fill it in 100 years ago, and it did fail. We're going to talk tonight, though, really about implicit bias and microaggressions. The title of the program is specific. It's what we think, we don't think, we actually do think. And during the course of our time together, I always want to remind you of a couple of things, one of which is I don't read slides, and I also encourage you to interrupt me. I'll be mailing a copy, emailing a copy of the presentation to Superintendent Fletcher tomorrow, and you'll be able to have copies of this to review on your own. And at the same time, if there are further questions or inquiries, again, I always ask you to reach out to me. In a few moments, I'm going to show you 2 slides from the Illinois School Boards Association and work they do in this area. And one of the things that they recommend and suggest is that when, in this case, boards, but when any other organization is really going on a path of talking about equity and hidden biases, et cetera, that we take a moment to really think about our own paths and to doing this type of work and other thoughts as well. So this in my world, this is work that's been going on literally in my family for decades. That's my father, as a young teacher in Hackensack way back in the mid-50s. Beach Street School, if you know Hackensack High School, Beach Street was converted to part of the annex of Hackensack High School on the other side of, I guess, of Powerfly Road over in the 60s. And when my father passed, he was the principal of the Nellie Parker Elementary School. And some of you may know that Nellie Parker was the first African-American educator in Bergen County from way back in the 20s, and retired in the late 50s from the city of Hackensack. And as a result, due to her work and other things, has been memorialized as such. But these are basically our essential questions for tonight. You know, tips on how to discuss bias, the difference between equity and equality. We'll talk about disproportionality, all aspects of inherent bias. You know, when I started doing this work, my assumption was inherent bias was really based on race and ethnicity and religion, and that's not the case. And we'll see that as this conversation develops. And we're also going to look at not only suggested readings and next steps, but also Governor Murphy's executive order from last fall, and also the elimination of remedial classes. And that has even greater context today as you know, we're addressing learning gaps and the research regarding learning gaps and the ineffectuality of remediation. And there's a whole separate presentation that we do on that as well. But as I mentioned, the Iowa School Boards Association has tips in order to discuss bias. And these are the probably two slides, which I'm really going to spend a lot of time talking about, or reading, I should say. And obviously, you have a strong commitment to equity. Otherwise, you wouldn't have this presentation. Having an equity statement, knowing your demographics, knowing and sharing your knowledge and your journey when it comes to race and equity and equality. Also able to initiate and create structural change, to change the status quo, but do it so it's institutionalized. And as a board, committing to goals and policies that we know drive the district. As you already know, through school boards, you can have your policies reviewed for a health check, a wellness check, and among the eyes that our policy department looks at is through the eyes of equity and see how your policies are in that area. But fiscal accountability, being data informed, having partners, and also knowing the work isn't easy, that there is opposition. And oftentimes the opposition is because of a misunderstanding of what we're talking about. In any of these conversations, we also have to keep in mind, you know, some of our primary responsibilities. And among them is, especially in a high school district, is preparing kids for their futures. And that also includes middle school and elementary kids. But I'm going to show you a couple of slides. This is from Fortune magazine. The National Education Association. Other researchers have shown the same types of skills that we really, they believe, are imperative for individuals to be successful in the 21st century. Number one on the list is empathy. You know, the ability to have an understanding and responding to a situation appropriately. And when we consider that over the last 20 some odd years in particular, and it continues today, that collaboration is even more important in the workplace. Well, when you're collaborating with others, it's important to have those social skills of empathy, etc. But we also know that our kids need to be creative. We need to let them be able to, quote unquote, think out of the box, have that freedom to think, and they have to be problem solvers. And finally, they need to be storytellers. And that's specific. It's communication. It's about reading and writing and speaking, but it's about using multi-modes of ways to communicate. And we also know that is clearly what's happening in society today when you consider the growth of the net, the internet, and how our articles are more and more interactive, be it from traditional newspapers or from these cutting-edge websites where there's both text as well as video and other images that are being used. And it's also for all of us to understand the difference between equality and equity. As you can see, I think this graphic explains it fairly well. Equality is giving everyone the same thing regardless if they need it or not. And here we have a family of four. Each was given a new bike. And as you can see from the graphic, it looks like the mom, the second one in from the right, is the one who's comfortable on that bike. Where in equity, there's very specific structures that are needed to level the playing field, or what equity is. It's not giving everybody the same thing or giving everybody something. It's about ensuring that those who need that assistance get that assistance. And that assistance is literally tailor-made for the individual. And you can see the four bicycles in the lower row, how each one is different by size or how it's propelled. And those are things that it's important for all of us to have an understanding so there's not confusion. And when it comes to implicit and unconscious bias, those terms are interchangeable. Unfortunately, it has been in the news. This is going back to 2018, when in Philadelphia there was a poor decision made in a Starbucks, and Starbucks closed all their stores nationally for a day in order to do professional learning and training for their staff. But it's not just Starbucks. It literally, implicit bias penetrates all realms of society, and hiring decisions, and you can see that list there. And we're going to take a few moments to talk about it a little bit. You remember this? You may remember this is from about a year and a half ago. This is in South Jersey. We're right now at the end of the wrestling season, and this is a South Jersey high school wrestler. He had been wrestling. I think he was a junior at this time. He had been wrestling all season, and he had dreadlocks. When it came down to the state tournament matches, a referee, an official, made the ruling that if this young man was going to participate, he had to have his dreadlocks cut. And in this photo, literally the trainer for that high school is cutting his dreadlocks. Well, there have been some changes since then. It was an inappropriate decision. There was no need for that decision. That specific referee has gone through training, and I assume he's back now working with kids. And there's been other professional learning that's gone on. Most particular, this past fall, the NJSIA, our state athletic association, joined with the NFL in order to address bias in officiating. And again, it's not just at the high school level or the local level. This is a study that the New York Times published. It covered that the NBA did it from 1991 to 2004. In essence, they also found, as a result of this study, that when it came time to call fouls, there was a supposition and a belief of bias. White referees called fouls at a greater rate against black players than against white players. There's implicit bias in healthcare. Again, I'm not going to read all these, but as you see these, there's the indications of how, based on one's background, according to studies, there is a discrepancy, a disparity in terms of how certain individuals of color and other non-white patients are treated. Literally this week, we know the Academy Awards, the nominees were announced. We also know that on an annual basis, there's the undertone that's in the news about the way our entertainment industry is addressing those of color and others. and how there's a bias and how we are choosing people even from who's going to play what roles, what's traditionally one color or another color, based on other types of biases, as well as what movies are being made by gender, etc. And this one surprised me. There was even a systemic racism implicit bias in graduate programs for nutrition and dietetics. What does that mean? In essence, what this slide is reporting that for kids, I should say, or students who are picky eaters, is to raise them to be intuitive eaters. So what does that mean? It means that they have choices in what they eat, and that healthy foods are put on the table. However, as we know, that there are certain urban areas, certain neighborhoods that the ShopRites, the larger food stores, are not there. Neither are fresh fruits and vegetables. There are small bodegas and smaller neighborhood stores. So those types of alternatives are not even available for certain populations. It raises the question for graduate level programs of how they can also compensate for those families that do not have access to fresher foods. There's also implicit bias that's being shown against our Asian American friends, and we've seen things in the news over the last week in particular about very aggressive bias, which is different, prejudice and violence against Asians in the city, New York City. However, this was a little bit different. This was a 2018 study, and what this study was, it showed that an Asian musician who was applying to a graduate program, if only their audio tape was heard, they had a better chance of being admitted to that graduate program than if the audio tape was played with the video portion. And the reason is that there was a perception of a lack of emotion. It had nothing to do with the quality of the playing. It was because of the expressions that were or were not shown, and the bias of those evaluators. There's also implicit bias in diagnosing autism. If you are a female, you have a greater possibility of not being diagnosed at an early age, and we know that age 3 is one of those important markers for those children on the spectrum. And one of the reasons that they suggest that there's this type of bias is that in the media, although the images are shown that are very positive, be it in TV shows or movies, they tend to only show males who are on the spectrum. Also, females have a better ability to mask and to parrot, meaning to mask their disability and to parrot or to show and copy what other people do. And you can imagine how as that individual gets older, the stress and anxiety of trying to do something which is out of the norm for them. This was again from just in November, but it's not new. We also know about artificial intelligence and robotics and how there is some bias that's built in there. Some of it's intentional, by the way. There's a report from about 2 years ago at a TD Bank in the Camden area, Cherry Hill area, actually, that they have a robot, looks like an R2-D2, that this type of robot is used in hotels to deliver room service, but it's also used to patrol parking lots and garages. Well, someone actually programmed this robot to catcall, to whistle at women. So it was a little joke on their part, but the women in the garages didn't think so, and I don't blame them, obviously. And this is just a slew of examples of artificial intelligence bias from headlines from a variety of publications over the last year and a half as well. So the question is, how do we develop our implicit biases? And in a moment, I'm going to share with you one of mine and how I discovered it, when I discovered it, I should say. But every day, from the moment we're born, we're bombarded with millions of images and bits of information. There's so much information that our brains take in, but overwhelmingly, the majority of it is unfiltered. It's not processed. It just goes in as raw information. So it registered subconsciously. It's not through a filter, so it's not interpreted. And our responses are influenced by that unfiltered information. And that unfiltered information becomes our implicit biases. So when you think about it, from the earliest of ages, there are images that we've seen, there are words that we've heard, And when they are not processed, it's building up a bank of implicit biases. However, we can address them if we learn what they are, and I'll show you in a few moments a way that we can do that. However, right now I'm going to share with you what for me is the most difficult part of this presentation. I've been doing this presentation for over 2 years now, and when I get to this slide, I will tell you I pause for a moment because I'm going to share with you an inherent bias that I didn't realize I had until I started doing this work. And it's very embarrassing. On the other hand, I share it with you because I try to be genuine and because I want to suggest to you that as you do your inventories, you will also find out what your biases are. Anyway, back in 1992, you may recall it was late August. At that time, one of the largest hurricanes that hit South Florida, Dade County, Homestead, etc. We were with my family, we had done a camping trip in the Smoky Mountains north of Miami. And then we went down to Orlando, good old Disney World. And then we went to see family down in the Fort Lauderdale area. We were there a couple days, and that's the camper we used on our trip. Fortunately, we were staying with family in the heat and humidity of South Florida in August. However, when I realized how severe the storm was, about 2 days before the storm actually hit Miami, we left the Fort Lauderdale area about 7:30 in the evening to drive north on 95 to return to New Jersey. If you know Route 95, I-95, if you've driven it, you know that there are long stretches of it that are barren. There's no light. There's just a beautiful dark roadway, very fast. We're in South Carolina, I should say. And that tire there you see in the back of that little camper blew. It's about 2:30 in the morning. I pull over to the side of the road, and I realized it was not safe because of the traffic or lack of traffic, the darkness, to change the tire on the highway. So I thought I would go to the next exit, and I would find some sort of a service area. And we drove about 5 or 7 miles, got off, and there was not a service area. There was an old gas station. It looked like it was out of the 1940s. It was greasy. It was dirty. It was open. It looked like something out of an Alfred Hitchcock movie almost. I pulled over to the side. I did not want to get in anybody's way, even though there wasn't a lot of traffic there, but the station was open. I jacked up the tire, undid the lugs, etc., and I didn't realize when I pulled into the station I was on a slight incline. Well, I could not jack up the trailer high enough in order to remove that wheel. So I sat there looking at it, or stood there, I should say, and the door to the service station opened, and that's when some 20 years later, I realized that I had biases I didn't realize I had, because I saw I'm 6'2", I go about 220. I saw two black individuals, black men, about the size of me, leaving that service station. Quite bluntly, and I'm embarrassed to say it, I looked into my SUV and my wife and my 2 kids, who were 10 and 13 at the time, and my first thought was not about anything but the safety of my family. Well, these 2 gentlemen came over. We talked for a few moments. What they literally did was, instead of having to move the car or trailer, they picked up the trailer. I took the tire off. I put the tire back on. They helped me do the lugs. I offered to pay them. They didn't take any money. I was on my way. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's an example of inherent bias. I had no reason. There was no indication for me to fear anything. Registered in the back of my mind were all those images, be it from working in the city, or from television news or TV shows. And when I share that with you, I ask you to also consider, what some of your biases could be, and why is it important? Because when individuals, be it adults or kids, are in a place where there is inherent bias, it is not active, it's passive. But things like the application of discipline policies and practices may be different, and that has an impact on self-esteem. We all already know about the biases of low expectations. We already know about kids who have been placed in classes for reasons that maybe were not valid. And their opportunities, be it academic or social, post-high school opportunities, et cetera, these are all things that are inhibited and affected. So how do we find out what our biases are? Well, we can do it independently. This is a link. It's the Harvard Project Implicit Bias Project. What it is about 20 different very simple computer tests. Each one probably takes about 4 minutes, if that. And an image is placed on the screen, and you have to make a choice of A or B, essentially. The way that the algorithm works is it measures how long it takes you to make that decision. And these are essentially the various specific individual assessments that you can take individually, everything from sexuality and race to weapons and harmless objects, etc. And again, I encourage you to do that. Do it independently. And I would also encourage you to have conversations with either at the board table and or with those who are close to you in your lives. And after that, it's always important to reflect. What did you learn? Did you have any surprises? Did you get any insights into your own biases? And what do you think the impact is when you know your biases, and can you really share that and really bring to it a greater understanding? Because again, the impact, and we'll talk about it in a few moments, on kids and adults can be and is significant. Among those is the bias of low expectations. An inherent bias. Can you imagine a coach at the beginning of the season telling the team that they're going to lose most of their games? But the truth is that kids are very perceptive. They know if their teacher, if their parent, or their coach believes in them, and if individuals in their lives do not believe in them, it has a direct impact on either their behaviors or their learning or both. And that's why we must be aware, and so that we are not influenced negatively by our own biases. Imagine that kid in that classroom who has that feeling. And I will share with you that there was I had two teachers who came to me when I was the assistant superintendent in North Brunswick. We're going to share it in a few moments. And they did a study which showed in that very diverse high school of 2,000 kids, there was inherent bias in the application of both discipline practices as well as in academics. So bias has many different faces. There's implicit bias, which we're talking about. Explicit bias. What's that? Well, that's really prejudice. That's when people are acting knowingly on their beliefs. There's also the bias of suppressed thoughts, of stereotypes, and then a result, an impact of these various biases, especially implicit bias, or microaggressions. And we'll talk about those a little bit, but those are the words and actions that diminish the value of others, and can have a significant impact. Be it in the classroom, in the workplace, or in the neighborhood. So this chart is kind of a good summary. Explicit bias, suppressed thought, implicit bias, microaggressions. Well, that explicit bias, we know it's expressed directly. People are aware of their bias. It's the exact opposite of implicit bias that I've just described. And if you notice, across the third or fourth row, we have operating consciously, meaning it's a conscious decision, or versus an unconscious decision. And we need to have an understanding of that. And you can see some of the examples of those different types of biases. But a suppressed thought is not expressed. It's where people conceal things to keep the peace. It might be concealing something that they might be a cigarette smoker. And in today's society, we have fewer people that smoke cigarettes, and hiding that smoking because that individual just doesn't want to deal with it. That's an example. But another suppressed thought could be someone who does have an overt prejudice or bias versus an implicit bias, and they do the same thing to try to keep it quiet. Some might say it's respectful. At least it's not publicized. We've been talking about our implicit biases. People are unaware of those biases. It's because of those unfiltered information that we receive. And as you can see, each of these subtle ways that these examples are how different individuals experience those types of biases. And then there are microaggressions, which we're going to break down in a moment into the various types of microaggressions. They're usually expressed indirectly. People are usually unaware. And they can be verbal comments, they can be brush offs, they can be just the way we treat people. And it's usually on an unconscious basis. But regardless, it has that same negativity. So when we think about how our hidden biases really do impact expectations, we know that when we label or a kid as being defiant or problematic, they're going to act in that way. They become self-fulfilling prophecies. So by being aware of our biases, we really are going to level that playing field. We're going to give a much more supportive climate for kids. And I would suggest to you, especially over the last few years, as there's been a return to an emphasis on social emotional learning, SEL, that it is the tie between social emotional learning, between addressing implicit bias, and between having healthy climates and really having kids who are achieving to the best of their abilities really becomes evident at the same time. Now, among the resources are Ohio State's Curran Institute. They focus on race and race relationships. And again, one of their belief systems based on their research is implicit bias may influence a teacher's expectations for academic success. And there have been two different meta-analysis of research studies that really find the same thing, that teachers hold low expectations. It might be implicit, it might be explicit, for both African American and Latino kids when compared to European American or Asian children. By being aware of our biases, and that's why it's so important to do this work at all different levels. I applaud this board, I applaud the community for being a part of it, and it's also important that the same type of professional learning is done throughout our schools with staff and with kids at the same time. The NEA, National Education Association, did a study of 16,000 teachers. And in essence, they asked both Black and non-Black teachers to predict the future of 10th graders. Non-Black teachers were about 30% likely than Black teachers to predict, I should say, a specific Black student with someday earn a college degree. For white kids, it's about the same thing. Well, I'm going to talk about a survey we did in North Brunswick, which mirrors these exact percentages. So the national data is reflected at the local level, within a certain percentage points, but it is there. So the NEA, what are they saying out of American University? They're not saying that anyone's too optimistic or pessimistic or a combination of the two. But what they are saying is that we should not be demonizing teachers. We shouldn't be demonizing individuals because of implicit biases, and that's the most important thing. It's such an easy fallback position, especially today, to have anger and to say this person is this or this person is that. But if we understand exactly how we gain and how we have our implicit biases, how we are victims of our own implicit biases, then we should not be demonizing and say we should be teaching. And that's the value of doing these types of professional learning efforts at all different levels. And there are consequences. We've heard about the school to prison pipeline. We've heard about the foster care to prison pipelines. We also know that people are robbed of compassion and passion when they're these types of victims and inequalities and injustices. And there's this unconscious hierarchy of caring. And kids understand that. We don't have to say a thing. Kids know by our actions, by our feelings. They're very perceptive. And we need to validate them, and we need to ensure that we are intentional in how we treat all kids. And that also means we need to be aware of our biases so that we can address them. And this is nothing new. Or here, this graphic. This is about a preschool, study done with preschool teachers. Who are they watching in a classroom? In other words, who are they have concerns about behavior? And 42% of the eyes of the time are looking at Black boys, then white boys, then white girls, and Black girls. So it's the same thing of the self-fulfilling prophecies. If we're looking for it, we're going to find it. At the same time, we really have to remember what the Latin word of discipline is, to teach. And I think sometimes we forget about that. Sometimes we, when I say we, I'm talking about when we're applying discipline policies in schools. Sometimes we get right to the punishment, which is again a mistake. We should be giving consequences, which are not demeaning. And we're not trying to figure out ways of teaching the child to make better decisions. And that's really is a critical part. But when we get to those fallouts of implicit bias, we talk about microaggressions. There are three different types. There are micro assaults, micro insults, and micro invalidations. they're all verbal. These are not things that are done through physicality. They're often subtle. They can be they're verbal or non-verbal. And it's also people are not aware of the hidden messages or the impact. We're going to just show you a few. And when I send you the PowerPoint tomorrow, I encourage you to look at the list of them that's coming in a few moments, because it really gives you some insight into what our kids are feeling and seeing in classrooms and schools across the country, as well as what adults are experiencing. So micro assaults, it's a comment. And there's an example here, where someone sees an activity and says, "Oh, that's so gay," in a very positive way. Well, it's making a stereotype. It's making an assumption, which can be hurtful. And it's not intended to be hurtful. And that's one of the key things. It's really through a lack of information, a lack of knowledge. So micro assault there, they have it's a comment that's made. It's conscious, deliberate, overt, and intentional. Not intentional to hurt, though. Micro insults. Well, an example is the one at the bottom, implying that a woman or a person of color received their job to affirmative action, not because they had the skills to do so. And a micro invalidation is to invalidate someone's feelings. It's telling a person of color, for example, that they're being too oversensitive to some sort of a comment that was made. Well, we can't be putting our beliefs and our emotions on somebody else. And what it does is it invalidates someone who has those types of feelings. So be it an assault, an insult, or an invalidation, they're not intentional unless the person learns it is and continues it. And we'll see some of those things that it can be. For example, I mentioned the TD Bank robot a little while ago. Well, there are, in our society, especially, it's been memorialized around construction sites, and I have family who are tradespeople. The whistles and catcalls for women walking down the street. It's about making an assumption that because someone may not have European features, that they were not born in this country, making a comment that they speak good English. It's about, in South Jersey right now, we have a couple of high schools that have a Native American connection, so by name or by the mascot. And it's also when we make assumptions about who's going to play what role, because it's traditionally one thing. That doesn't mean that's the way it has to be or should be. When we make an issue of how somebody speaks, one of the most things that unfortunately I've seen even at graduations in districts where I've worked, when an administrator mispronounces the name of a graduating student. Somebody's name is obviously very important to them, and at such an important event to not take the time is wrong, quite bluntly. It's by having different expectations based on somebody's zip codes. And I'm not going to continue to read this list, but again, I think you're starting to get the idea that there are a lot of different things that happen on a daily basis that we may not witness, but we know it's happening, and we not always think about what the impact is on others. So again, the whole idea is that by being aware of the types of microaggressions that we see in society, but especially we see in school, and by literally having those conversations with the student body, with the adults in that building, so that we're all aware and can be respectful of each other. So if we accept that, like implicit bias, most microaggressions are not deliberate, but are subconscious, and we truly want to teach, the way we approach the aggressor must not make them feel defensive. Again, if we do that, then we're giving them a message which is not according to what we are believing from the research from inherent bias. I'm not going to go into the details of this, but our kids from the youngest of ages have been taught in elementary school that when they have a conflict with somebody else, to use an I statement in order to express themselves and solve it. And that is certainly true when it comes through microaggressions and inherent bias. By using that type of a structure, we get our messages across without being accusatory and putting the individual who made the error on the defensiveness. Again, these are just graphics for us to consider, and it's just some ways that it's even being addressed in New Jersey. Disparities in school discipline, if you're a black student, 3 to 4 more times likely than a white peer to be expelled or face multiple suspensions. And this is a study that it just came out in the fall, was it from ASCD, and every school district in the country was analyzed in terms of their discipline policies and actually their suspensions and the number of instructional days lost per 100 kids in a 180 school year. And the things that are, as you can see, there is a disparity. And the one of the surprises, at least for me when I saw this data, is that although, again, inappropriate, 103, the number's 103 for our black students, but look at the number for our students with disabilities all the way up to the right-hand side at 68 days per 100 kids per 180 school years. That's a third of the school year that kids are losing if they have disabilities. The questions become, are there better ways? And I'm asking the question. I don't know the specificity, but based on some of the other work, clearly there is work being done in order to address that. Again, this is just more of the specificity about the most extreme days lost. 11 million days of learning was lost due to suspension. That's a lot of time that kids have not been in school. Now, what is good news is that these districts and districts across the country are very much aware. Boards are doing professional learning. Teachers and administrators are providing professional learning or participating. And as you can see, that these are the top five states where the data is declining. And knowing what's happening in New Jersey, which also does monitor our discipline, et cetera. I'm sure that I have confidence that across New Jersey, our districts are also making progress, varying rates, but I'm sure it's being addressed across the board. The other thing that's important is disproportionality. Disproportionality in terms of who is being classified. There is data which shows that across the country, including New Jersey, if you're an African American male, you have a disproportionate opportunity, quote unquote, to be classified. The state does monitor that and does implement action plans for districts. In my last district, there was something of 22% classification rate for black males early in my tenure there. And it should be around 14%. That district was put on notice, and they did address it, and it was reduced over the course of time. The same also, as we've already said, when it comes to disproportionality, when it comes to suspensions as well as expulsions. So these are things that we really need to also be aware of in our work. Now, Ed Week, one of the larger publications in our world of education, in 2010, this is the most recent study they did. And you can see that they studied 72,000 K to 12th graders. And in essence, 18% of that sample were black students, African American students, and you can see the number of kids, of those kids who were suspended, and that the data, even at this study, also reflects the 3.5 times more likely to be suspended. And it doesn't matter what part of the country, Portland, Oakland, Chicago, they all have similar types of results. And that also includes the fact that our black kids are being routinely suspended for minor infractions like talking back and writing on desks, and that zero tolerance was not the reason for these significant increases. Well, what is the case is that implicit bias is a major factor of racial disproportionality in school discipline. It's that whole subconscious mental process is because we are not aware of those of our biases, and when we are aware of them, there is a change and there is a reduction. I mentioned earlier about the school to prison pipeline, the foster care to prison pipeline. The data is there, but what's more important, what's happening in a couple of counties, Middlesex County for one, Gloucester County for another. In Middlesex County, the prosecutor for the last 2 years, in a pilot program that they initiated, he has somewhere around 24 social service agencies who will work with students, kids, I should say, and families who make a bad choice and have police complaints signed against them. Like every prosecutor's office, the Middlesex County prosecutor also has a victims' rights unit. And the victim's right advocate works with the victim. Only if the victim agrees is the police complaint held in abeyance for a year, assuming or waiting for the student to complete that counseling program. But those are the types of things that are happening in Middlesex County as well as in Gloucester County, in order to keep kids out of that system. The other thing is that, are we doing right by all kids? We know that, and we are still in certain places tracking students. It's based on their perceived ability or prior achievement. We also know that type of tracking, which does happen across the state, across the country, is going to limit opportunities for kids. And way back in 1894, when the Committee of 10 met in Princeton to standardize the educational system in our country, one of the proposals that was rejected was separating white or college-bound students from the factory-bound immigrants and minorities. So 130 years ago, some of the same challenges that our society faced then, we continue to face today. And that also means, are we limiting kids to their opportunities to participate in honors and AP classes? And if a student in high school is still in remedial classes at a junior or senior, when do they catch up? Well, I mentioned earlier about two high school teachers when I was assistant superintendent in North Brunswick. They asked to talk to me, and when we met, they showed me some data which was extraordinarily upsetting, to say the least. Because they did a triangulated study and they demonstrated that North Brunswick Township High School, a school of about 2,000 kids, if you were a student of color, you were treated differently. They were not easy conversations for them to have with me initially, and they were not easy conversations for us to have with the faculty and then eventually the staff, the parents and student body as well. But they had they did their work, they did their homework, and let me just take a few moments just to show you what the data shows. And it mirrors the consequence data mirrors the national data. In 1990, North Brunswick Township High School had about 1,200 kids. In 2017, they had about 1,800 kids. As you can see, in the early 90s, it was primarily a white district. And as you can see, over the course of those 20 some odd years, it evolved to be today where it is a very racially balanced district. One of the reasons for that initial change was way back in the early 90s. New North Brunswick is literally adjacent to New Brunswick. New Brunswick went through an urban renewal program, New Brunswick Tomorrow, which has totally recreated that city. And there were projects of residences on Route 18 between Douglas College and Rutgers University College Avenue, which you may be aware of, that were torn down. And there was a huge relocation of New Brunswick families from there. Well, what we also learned when you look at data, we looked at grades, and I want to emphasize, when I say we, I'm talking about the high school staff and the high school administration. And yes, we did bring in support through Rutgers University and other consultants to do professional learning with first at the high school and then eventually throughout the district. But you could pretty much predict, based on one's ethnicity or color, where they were going to fall academically. As you can see, if you were the A's were pretty much Asian and white students, and the F's were pretty much Black and Latino students. Discipline reflected the same as you saw on these earlier slides. Look at the number of incidences compared to the student body, and this is when they were pretty much equal. And you can see that, again, if you were Black or Latino, you had an issue. These are the suspension rates. I asked you to look at the suspension rates with students with disabilities also. And one of the things that we learned through the work was that the teachers actually interviewed students who had graduated 5 years earlier. And they specifically looked for kids whose names appeared in the discipline rolls. And what they learned from across the board of kids told stories of, for example, reporting to class with their friend a few minutes late. And they were admitted to class immediately, and their friend was sent to the office for a pass. The teacher didn't realize, didn't ask, but it turned out from what the kids said, now they were in their early 20s, that they were both doing the same types of things, just hanging out, nothing wrong. And if you were an Asian student, you were told to sit down in class. If you were a Black or Hispanic, the teacher sent you to the office for a pass. The story repeated itself continuously. And I have to emphasize, going back to what was said from the Ohio State slide and the American University slide, this is not about demonizing. It was not about attacking individuals, but we had to find out the root causes to do so. We also know in 2013, if you can see, that found is foundations, that's remedial classes. CP is college prep, honors, and AP, of course. And as you can see, who was in the foundations or remedial classes and who was not in the AP classes was alarming. Well, there was a lot of work that was done in order to address biases. Some individuals prefer data and others are driven by emotions. Well, the teachers, and now the group had expanded to a committee of volunteers, as well as administrators, and there was also a parent on this group. What they started, digging down deeper and deeper, and they finally realized that this is stuff that had to be done. We did equity walks. There's professional reading, and there was a whole look at how we address all achievement, etc. And then there was also a surveys that were done. 250 staff members in that school. I asked you to think back to the national data that I shared a few moments ago about who was going to succeed by that NEA study. Well, at that local high school, 66% of the staff said that whites were likely to take an AP course. 75% said an Asian was likely to take an AP course. 0.4%, or one staff member, said it was likely that a Latino would take an AP class. And 0.8%, or two staff members, said it was likely that an African American or Black student would take an AP class. The flip side is who's going to take basic skills was the exact opposite. As you can see, 7% said an Asian would take basic skills, 13% said a white, 65% said Black would, and 67% said that a Latino would. Well, how many kids who are perceived as troublesome or violent or just behaving inappropriately are put into these classes not because of their achievement, but because of those types of issues, or not necessarily when it comes to basic skills, but in general with this discipline? How many of our kids are really not don't have programs within their schools that are really going to be speaking to them? It's very difficult to get into our low-tech schools today. Some 15,000 more kids applied to a seat than were accepted some 2 or 3 years ago, as they also take on additional responsibilities. So how many of those kids are in programs at their schools that are not really targeted for them? Well, as part of the process of the professional learning, there were videos done of staff, of kids. I'm not going to get into the details, but I can tell you that initially there was rejection by some staff that said it was a setup. It was not. And eventually, as the learning took place and as defense mechanisms were reduced, because again, we were not demonizing or pointing blame. We were just identifying facts. And that's pretty much what's important. So we were able to address those learners who needed data, meeting staff, and also those who preferred the emotion of this personalized stories in order to give a full picture of what was actually happening in that high school. And it was a 4-year process, and the process still continues today. As you can see, I'm not going to read all the professional development. It was significant. There were lessons that were learned each year. And among the things was that we really needed to establish norms of how we worked and spoke with each other. And we also knew it was not going to happen overnight. We also had a variety of professional learnings, and we worked with the Rutgers Institute for Improving Student Achievement and their consultants in order to help us. The amount of reading opportunities is significant. There's 4 or 5 slides at the end which you can review on your own. One of the elementary schools is essentially 98% Spanish speaking. So very different programs were also implemented in that program, not only for the kids, but also for the families, so that they could be more involved within their child's education. And finally, there was detracking, and between 2011 and 2016 to 17, remedial classes were eliminated. There were bridge classes that were put in their place for several years in order to help those kids with that transition. As you can see, in 2010 to 2011, remedial English, 31% of the kids in that class were Hispanic, 38% were Black, and 23% were white, and the remainder were Asian. In 2016, those classes were eliminated, and it's something that district is very proud of. At the same time, students in college prep English and students in honors English, students of color and all students, there was an increase. They were given opportunities they didn't have before. The same thing held true in remedial geometry. As you can see on the left, 2010 to 11, the 41% of the kids in remedial geometry were Hispanic, and about 32% rather, I should say, 33% were Black. Those classes are no longer available. Instead, kids are taking either college prep or honors classes or AP classes, again, with support structured at the same time. At the same time, the district has had a focus on having a diverse faculty and staff. Quite bluntly, it's harder to find diverse teachers than we had thought because of other opportunities, etc. I will say that the two teachers who did this work also started a Future Teachers of America Club way back in 2007, 2008, with the hope of encouraging those kids who are going to be going into education to have some additional opportunities in high school, but then also to encourage them to come back and teach in their home district. And that has been one way that they have been starting to get a little more diversification in the teaching staff. The principals, however, and leadership, while there have been a very diverse administrative staff below principals, that was not the case with the principals. And as you can see, between 2010 and 2016, there was a significant effort to have the best qualified candidates, but also to ensure that they were reflective of the students in the school. Numerous successes, again, everything from detracking to all different types of alternative discipline strategies. PBSIS, positive behavior supports in schools from the DOE, is probably one of the best programs that they've put together. But, and if you have questions, these are the three individuals. Brian Zakowski, superintendent. He is still there. Brian's been there since 2007. Sid Dawson is a teacher. He was left the district to go to Cherry Hill as a principal, and then when he saw there was an opening, he applied for a principalship in the district, which he does have. And Kane Ellis is a supervisor of language arts at the high school. Again, these are the contributors. Very quickly, in last October, our governor issued an executive order across all departments. We're just talking a little bit about teaching and education because of the systemic racism and bias that is in our society. There was a significant increase, as you can see in red, between 2019 and 2018 of bias in our society, including significant increases of biases in our schools. Now, this type of bias is not inherent bias. This is outright bias and prejudice. But it also feeds, as we know, to some of the other issues that we have. There are some 27 recommendations. I'm not going to read them to you. I do suggest that you look through them when you get this tomorrow or the following day through the district. But as you can see, some of the things are things that you're already doing, some of the things that are on your radar. But what's the most important thing is having an awareness and taking action, which is very, very important. There are a variety of other ways that we can help you, obviously, from school boards, one of which is the Labor Management Collaborative. There is a significant correlation between collaboration and student learning, retention of teachers, et cetera, and it's work that we're very proud of. We have actually a conference on the 24th of this month. It's free. It's a virtual conference from 1 to 4, and among the speakers will be our new Secretary of Education, Miguel Cardona, as well as our governor, and as well as our interim commissioner of education in New Jersey. Again, your data will tell you a lot of information. It's going to talk to you about your student management, about who's being cited for what. The same thing holds true with our classification reports and our other discipline data at the same time. I talked to you a little bit about wellness checks. I do encourage you to do that. And I just wanted you to always bear in mind that sameness does not equal fairness, especially in behavior. You know, we really need to be working with our kids individually and treating them as such. And there are 8 ways that we can reduce our implicit biases to complete our time together. We need to be introspectful, mindful. We need to take perspective. We need to learn to slow down in order to really analyze and figure out what's happening. We need to be individuals and assess people as based on their characteristics, not as stereotypes. We also need to check our messaging, you know, and we need to institutionalize fairness. We need to say things through an equity lens. We make to ensure that we lead through policy that's equitable. And we need to take 2. In other words, just take a few moments in order to ensure that we're aware of what we're doing and how we're doing. These are 3 or 4 slides of books that have been recommended through the Rutgers Institute as well as through other sources. And again, things to consider as you continue to do this work. If you're human, you have biases. The question to ask ourselves is not do we have biases, but which biases do we have? And if we are aware of them, we do create better climates with better opportunities for all kids. And no matter how open-minded, socially conscious, anti-racist I think I am, I still have old, learned, hidden biases that I need to examine. It's my responsibility to check myself daily for my stereotypes, prejudice, and ultimately for discrimination. So I thank you for your attention, and if you have any questions, now is a great time to do that.
Board, anybody? All right, if not, Vince, once again, thank you for being here and helping with this important topic. As I filled you in prior to arranging this, some former students and some parents brought some issues to our attention as far back as this late June.
I go back to school and then I go to work, and after work I go to the gym.
Excuse me. Could somebody mute there, please? There you go. Thank you. Brought some issues to our attention back in late spring and the summertime, and then again in the fall. So this is one step on embarking on trying to address those issues as we go forward with tolerance, diversity, equity. A couple of quick points. I thought it was very informative that you described how we slowly accumulate these biases over time. And I think it's important that we need to recognize that schools have some limited ability to address those ones that are picked up outside of school. We certainly have the responsibility for the ones that are inside of school. One thing I think we could focus on more is that, you know, when there is discipline, you know, both parties have rights. And I think one of the things that leaves people a lot of, especially those who feel that they're victims of something, what leaves lacking is the fact that we're not at liberty to say how we discipline the other individual when things are brought to our attention. And I think that creates a little distrust in on both sides of the issue, because even if we have the most extensive intervention programs, you know, I'm not able to say, well, Vince DeLucia did this, and therefore we did this to Vince DeLucia. As a continuing part of this, our district just created another, or completed another survey. We've been surveying our community for the last 3 years. One aspect of that was how are we doing on diversity issues, tolerance issues, et cetera. Just for everyone's knowledge, we had, the administration had a debrief with the survey company today at the beginning of our data analysis point. We'll be making presentation either at the next board meeting or the one in April with that data, so that we can share what we've learned from both our students and our families. And then finally, later on tonight on our agenda, I'm asking the board to modify the calendar for March 31st because we are scheduling the kind of training that you addressed here, where with our professional development and all staff will be dealing with the author Matthew Kay, who will be coming in to talk to our staff and give us some strategies on addressing these issues in the classroom, as well as making sure that there are ways that our curriculum can engage students in these issues. So it's part of a multi-part issue that we've been dealing with.
Yeah, if I may, Patrick, I mean, and the process is terrific, and what you've outlined is really, you know, the logical way to address these issues. You know, these are institutional issues that are not changed overnight. You know, and on top of that, when you throw into that layer that they're not intentional, and that's part that's misunderstood. And so I applaud the board and your efforts in particular.
Vince, Patrick, I just have two
Sure.
things. It's Stephanie Hartman. Two things. I don't remember seeing it a lot through New Jersey school boards, but we get a lot of emails, so I apologize. The Handle with Care program that came out of the prosecutor's office, that's sort of meant to diminish some of the responses of student behavior after there might be a variety of different incidents that might have happened in the student's home. Will there be more, you know, not everyone's aware of that from a policy perspective, and the implementation is probably weeks old or so. Will there be a little bit more guidance throughout the state, sort of so people just understand what that means? And then my other question would be about the concept of restorative justice, which is used a lot in Canada, and it comes out of a Native American practice. But in kind of introducing people to that concept that even when harmed, there's a possibility to find understanding between two people. Yeah,
a couple things. First of all, yeah, through our health and wellness efforts at school boards, there will be more information with Handle with Care. It obviously is a critical program, for schools to have an awareness that there was some sort of a crisis or trauma in a child's home the night before, without knowing the specifics, but at least there's an awareness of it so the school can act in kind. As far as restorative justice, there are several different types of programs. Restorative justice is one, cooperative discipline is another. What's the greatest import is that there's that organized structure to professional learning, instead of kind of a random approach to how we address when kids make bad choices. And that's probably one of the deficits of most teacher ed programs, is that there's not a lot of done in there. But be it restorative justice and programs like that, which help not only the understanding, but it brings resolution in a respectful way. And what it doesn't do, it doesn't cause finger pointing, because it's the finger pointing that really creates additional issues among those kids. The whole point is to treat it really almost clinically and give kids alternatives to how they're handling specific situations. In cooperative discipline, there are, in essence, there are 4 reasons based on research that kids misbehave. And the whole goal of that program is to teach kids how to achieve their goal of behavior in a way that's appropriate and approved by the school, for example. It's the kids looking for attention, they're looking for power, looking for revenge, and they're looking to avoid failure. And without getting into the weeds, so what I'm suggesting is that whatever programs or processes that the district chooses, what's most important is to give that organized academic way of responding to when a child makes a bad behavior choice. The one last thing I do want to mention, though, in that area is through the Search Institute, if you're familiar with it. The Search Institute has been around since the early 80s. They have researched and provide 40, it's called the 40 assets. And there are 40 assets for high school kids, middle school kids, elementary kids, and younger kids. And in essence, these are 40 things. The more of these assets that a child has, the less likely they're going to make a bad choice, period, in life. And there are things that you're familiar with. It's limiting the amount of time that you're on TV. It's having dinner as a family maybe once a week. It's being involved in organized activities, be it at school or through spiritual groups, the arts, music, athletics. It's things that, that are kind of common sense things, but we kind of have lost them at times, and we don't always understand the value of them. So I do suggest that by reviewing the assets, it's another tool to give to your families and to your teachers in order to help kids make better choices.
Yeah, and they're secondary on their developmental relationships that they have now put out. That research and that framework is almost more impactful, I think, than the asset work that they've done. So thanks,
exactly.
Vince.
You're welcome.
If I could, just a quick point, because Mrs. Hartman raised it, both our police departments have become involved with the Handle with Care program, and they've assigned point officers to that program who are beginning interacting with us in both of our schools.
Terrific, terrific.
Vince, would you be able to stick around for a couple of minutes? We have one or two questions from the public. Mark, can you, I see a couple of hands. If there is a question pertinent to Vince's presentation, we'll take a question or two from the public. Is there?
Yes, we have Vanessa B. You can unmute yourself.
Hi, everyone. Just want to thank you, Mr. DeLucia, for coming. This was a wonderful presentation. Board and administration, this is a wonderful surprise. This is what we've been asking for, so I'm actually speaking on behalf of those students, alumni, and families that have been bringing this issue to the discussion here, to the meetings since last June. This is just a wonderful step in the right direction. We look forward to additional presentations either here at the board and certainly, with the students. Thank you again. Just thank you for such a wonderful presentation. Also, Mr. DeLucia, you should also know that our board already has those steps from the New Jersey Task Force, the 27 steps. I was thrilled to hear you mention them because it's such a wonderful resource for all districts in New Jersey to take a look at and see what we can do better as a result of, all of the data that they were able to put together. So thank you again.
You're very welcome.
Any more questions or comments?
Okay.
Well, Vince, thanks as well thanks again for everything.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting me. I always love working with your board. Please stay safe and healthy, and best of luck with our reopening plans too.
Thank
Be well,
you.
everybody.
You as well. Thank you,
Take
Vince.
care. Be safe.
Okay, that was great. We have another presentation tonight. Tom Bonfiglio, our business administrator, is going to present the preliminary budget for the last time, for Riverdale at least.
Well, let's be clear. It's Tom's last time. Unfortunately, Riverdale will have a budget forever.
It is our last time.
Oh.
Just getting the presentation set up. So please bear with us.
Because facilities has not told us what's happening.
Look at that, Tom.
On the screen.
It's on screen. You're looking pretty good. In another month or two, teams are going to be able to have you be on top of the presentation, just like there. So.
Hey, Mr. Graff, while we wait for the presentation to come up, do you think we could have our students give their report in case they have to get off for homework or something like that?
Absolutely. I was thinking the same thing. So why don't we go to the student member? Jesse, I did see your name up there. Are you here, Jess? No. Okay, I thought I saw his name. Noel, do you have anything for us tonight? Did we lose you? How about Josh?
Yeah, I thought the presentation was very interesting, and I would like to update the board. The business club does the stock market challenge every year, and it starts in October and November, and it lasts up until mid-March. So the last day of trading was last Friday. So out of I think over 100 teams, one of the Riverdale teams came in 4th place. And that was the first time we've ever gotten that far. And the rest of the Riverdale teams did pretty well too. They placed in the top, all of them placed within the top 50. And the way it works is at the beginning of the process, each group is given $1 million worth of cash, and they have to invest it in different stocks. And all the groups got a profit this year. The highest group made over $300,000 in fake money from this $1 million, while the majority of the groups made over $100,000. And the business club was very impressed with that because that was the first time they've ever done that well.
Nice. Very good.
You there now, Noel?
Hi, sorry, mine was cutting out. I was trying to raise my hand.
That's okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I was just gonna say that I know that a lot of the winter sports are coming to a close now, and then I think wrestling and volleyball are starting up, so that'll be really exciting for those sports since they got that 4th season in between, and I think a lot of students are excited to watch that through the live stream.
Awesome.
Very good.
And I just wanted to thank Josh because Mr. Bonfiglio followed your investment advice from the club, and that's why the budget's in such good shape, is we've invested all the money and our students did it for us. Thank you very much. I think Mr. Bonfiglio is ready.
We're good to go?
Okay.
Okay, folks. Hello, I'm Tom Bonfiglio, the business administrator for Riverdale Regional, and tonight is the preliminary budget presentation for the 21-22.
Do you have a microphone?
Yeah, you can't hear him.
Yeah, I'm not hearing you for some reason. Can you hear me when I speak here, or no? But not Tom. Of course not.
Well, Tom, come stand over here.
You maybe if you're a little closer, we can get a better sound.
Yeah.
So used to.
And now we can make fun of you. Whoops.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
So for the 2021-2022 school year,
Just tap that and click next. There you go. It's coming. Not behaving again?
not bad.
I'll just click through it.
The Riverdale Board of Education is comprised of the Budget Committee, and each one of the members has had an opportunity to review the budget through the Finance Committee, and it's being presented tonight to the entire Board of Education. One of the things that many people don't realize is that the budget process starts in September, culminates in April at the conclusion of the final presentation to prepare it for July 1st implementation. It is zero-based budgeting, where all expenses are justified, and the final piece of the puzzle comes in the middle of February, in which the governor makes his address and state aid is distributed. Once the numbers are then calculated, the superintendent and I, along with the budget committee, sit down and see where we are and see where we're going with the budget for the upcoming school year. One of the items that I'd like to discuss, and it's kind of interesting to see, is the enrollment that Riverdale has had over the past 15 years. As you can see here, it is approximately 1,600 youngsters that have resided in Riverdale for the past several years. We've hit a peak of 1,677 youngsters resident enrollment many years ago, but based upon the enrollments in the elementary and currently here at the high school and middle school, we will have around 1,600 children for the next several years. State aid. When I show you this next graph, you're going to be amazed because it depicts what we've gone through over the past several years. I have been here for all of them, and many of you board members too. For the upcoming 21-22 school year, Riverdale received approximately $1.5 million. And as we go back to the 2010-2011 school year, it was completely cut. So from that point forward on to next year, you see the increase in state aid. And one of the many questions that are going to be asked is what occurred for going into next year. Over the past several years, there's been a discrepancy in all school districts in which the state has made up a formula of who received more state aid than they should have and who received less state aid than they should have. So over the past several years, you can see that Riverdale has not had its fair share of state aid, and we have increased over the past 3 years to 1.5 million for next year. Where is this going to go? Well, it's hard to predict, but if things go where the state's formula depicts, Riverdale should be receiving more state aid than the 1.5 that it received this year. It's an interesting chart because it goes back 15 years and where we were. When we try and figure out and calculate where our expenses are, the two biggest components are salaries and benefits. And over the past 6 years, what we've tried to do is to bring both of them down. So essentially, the state has offered new medical plans for the employees, and through the turnover of more experienced people retiring and younger people coming in, commonly called breakage, you can see the trends that the salaries and benefits have gone down a little bit, and that is a good sign. For the next school year, there is 5 retirements. Coming into this school year for the 2021 year, there were 6. And for a district that's got approximately 250 employees, 11 over the next year is a lot for us. In next year's budget, 21-22, for capital projects, there are two. There's a security vestibule that's going to be added in the middle school and one in the high school. How does this all break out? When we talk about these different categories of current expense, capital outlay, and so on, current expense is the category in which our day-to-day operations are run. Lighting, utilities, textbooks, salaries, benefits, periodicals, anything that's needed for the children to get educated. And 34 million, almost 35 of the 37 is run on day-to-day expense. Capital outlay, as we talked about, the security vestibules, debt service. When, if you recall, we had the referendum in 2003, that's what this is being paid off for. And grants, these are federal grants such as IDEA, ESSA, and CARES. For a total budget going into next year of a little more than $37,066,056. In February of 2013, the Board of Education refinanced its debt. One had expired, and the loan debt that's remaining has 3 years to be paid off. And it will end in the 23-24 school year. Ultimately, because of the refinancing, we're not going to be asking taxpayers for the remaining balance of $343,485. How does it all break out? So between the Oradell and River Edge boroughs, the tax burden is 49.1 and 50.9. It did not change from this current school year. And it will show an increase of $87 for an average home in Oradell of $567,000 and $51 for River Edge. One of the items that the Finance Committee is recommending to the Board of Ed is not to go to the 2% cap. Instead, 1.4. All items in the curriculum, athletic, are being met. And at this point in time, with COVID and people having a little more difficulty, they thought that it was a good recommendation for the Finance Committee to bring to this Board of Education. And that is it for the 21-22 school year.
Very nice, Tom.
Oh, I'm sure.
Does anybody have any questions for Tom? Thanks, Tom.
Alan, I'm sorry, are we doing questions when we get to it on the agenda, or you want me to do it now?
On the consent agenda?
Yeah.
No, let's wait until after the committee reports, okay? My report is brief tonight since we've been at this for a while already. It's just a reminder to the board for the CSA evaluations. I know I sent an email out. It seems like we had just completed it, but we're getting back on the timeline this year. We were late last year due to the COVID. And Tom, are there any reminders? Does anyone need to meet any objectives for governance 1, 2, 3, 4? Can you just double check that at some point during the week?
I sure will.
Just to make sure that everyone has the requirements taken care of. That's all I have tonight. So Patrick, if you have anything to add.
I also have a very brief report, just to continue on your theme of evaluations. Once we complete the CSA evaluation, the board self-evaluation will be the next item on our list, which will, it's actually available now, but I think it would be premature to finish that until after you complete the CSA evaluation. So we should look forward to that sometime in the beginning of April for the board. So my other part of my report is the good and the bad. There's no ugly as a part of this. As you referenced the Clint Eastwood movie, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. As I mentioned at our last board meeting, I would give you some data as to the increase in student attendance based upon the fact that we've modified our ability to attend. We eliminated the virtual Wednesday. Students are basically attending every other day in cohorts. We had surveyed our community before to determine whether or not we have the ability to combine the cohorts and maintain social distancing, and we're unable to do that at this point. I am aware, I think we're all aware, that the CDC is continuing to evolve their recommendations, and I believe over the next several weeks they may even come out with additional ones regarding schools. I'm comparing two dates, the week of February 8th, which is prior to the implementation of the new schedule and prior to our February break, and at the end of last week. So at the middle school, cohort A, prior to I'm sorry, Okay, at cohort A, prior to the break at the middle school, had 131 students. Cohort A now has 156 students, which is a 25 student increase, or 19%. There were 134 students attending cohort B. Now there's 167, and that's a 33 student increase, or 25%. At the high school cohort A, 95 students attended before the break. Now it's an average of 141, which is an increase of 46 students, or 48%. And cohort B is 109 students before break. Now it's 160, which is a 51 student increase, or 36%. Parents in the stratified approach, as we mentioned, we were talking about all students with IEPs, all students with 504s, all students who are struggling as defined by our INRS program. They've been offered their attendance. It'll still creep a little bit, and we may even have other students who have elected virtual to return. We're starting to see a little bit of that as we go. However, the unintended consequence of that is the fact that now if you have an exposure in the school, you potentially expose more students. And if a student is attending every day, they can affect multiple cohorts. And that is, in fact, what took place last week in the middle school. So we had 2 student exposures that affected our students and staff. The total impact of that was 52 students being sent into quarantine and 17 staff members. Having that many staff members in quarantine prevents us from opening the building in a safe manner, which forced us into the decision to close the school for the next 2 weeks and pivot to virtual learning. We anticipate that we will reopen on March 26th, and we'll continue to monitor the situation as we go forward. The other piece of good news that took place is that through a program with the Bergen County Department of Education, the Bergen County Education Association, and the Bergen County Superintendents Association, 800 Johnson & Johnson vaccines were made available to educators on Saturday. This past Saturday, Riverdale was fortunate enough to have 8 people vaccinated. So 2 weeks from that date, Johnson & Johnson is the 1-dose vaccine. So 2 weeks from that date, we'll have an additional 8 people fully vaccinated. The importance to that is right now, fully vaccinated people who have an exposure and are asymptomatic do not need to quarantine. So hopefully, as the virus continues to as the vaccine continues to penetrate our population, we will have less and less staff members be forced into quarantine because of an exposure. I am pleased to say that we have a data collection method where confidentially we, of course, are collecting the vaccination information from our staff so that we can make these decisions as we go forward with exposures. And I'm very pleased to say that our staff has been most cooperative in assisting us gather that information, and we're beginning to see a significant number of our staff vaccinated. We're not at, we're at about 20%, and I suspect by the end of the month we'll be a little higher than that. And it looks to me more and more like now that educators became eligible. If you recall, Governor Murphy's executive order was going to make educators eligible today, March 15th, but in fact, they moved it back to March 2nd, and there's been a significant jump around the county as to that. So I'm pleased to see that it's moving in that direction. We'll continue to monitor our situation and determine if there's any ability to increase our in-person learning further and further as we go through the rest of this school year. That concludes my report.
Okay, thank you very much. Quick question, Patrick.
Yeah.
The CDC guidelines right now, we can have up to 50% of the population in the school building?
No, it doesn't say that at this point. As a matter of fact, the irony of it is that the current CDC guidelines, the ones that were hailed as being released a week or two back, if we applied them as they are, New Jersey secondary education will be remote because the infection level that the CDC uses is higher than the one that's being used at the Department of Health. So they're still recommending social distancing. However, as I said, I believe that those recommendations will continue to be modified as we go along.
Okay, because when we started the cohorts in the high school, for instance, didn't we have 400 students in the building the first week? Is that number correct?
I think that's a little high. I think what we had between who chose to go eligible and who didn't was in the high school closer to 300.
Okay.
But if you recall, what we did is have our architect over the summertime do an analysis of how many students we could fit in the classrooms utilizing a 6-foot separation.
Right.
And that limited our ability to put students in the classroom, and we're still at 6 feet here. I know other districts have been making some changes, and we'll see that, but I just caution everybody, as I mentioned, the unintended consequence of that is the more that you have in the building, the more frequency you have, it also increases the opportunity for greater levels of exposure, which we hope never happens, but it's just statistics that we have to keep an eye on.
Okay, thank you. Let's get into the rest of the committee reports. Budget and Finance, Joe, I'm sure Tom stole some of your thunder, but...
No, just to add to Tom's report, you heard it. The big thing is that because of the fact that the state aid was increased this past year, the Budget Committee is, and it is on the agenda, the preliminary vote is, as Tom mentioned, everything that was, all the programs and everything from prior years is still here. Plus, we added in the budget another couple of positions, teacher positions. And with all that too, decided that to recommend to the rest of the board that the increase to the tax rate only go up 1.4% as opposed to the 2%, which I know a lot of districts, it's, if you don't go there, you don't, I guess we'll say is the, what do you put, Tom? The the loss
effect
of the
can
funds,
compound.
the
effect can
compounding
compound.
that you're going to get and all too.
Right.
But we felt it was important because of the fact that we're there and there were no cuts to anything and all too, that to go that way with the 1.4. And hopefully it'll pass tonight, preliminary, and then in April when we do the final vote, that the rest of the board will also vote accordingly. So thank you, Tom, for everything you've done. I know it's your last one. Hopefully that the last presentation, like we talked about, there'll be a lot of flashing and stuff on the screen and, music and the whole thing. So thank you.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Facilities and security, Doug?
Since the last board meeting, we have not met.
Okay. Community relations and technology, John?
We haven't met yet, no update.
Okay. Claudia, curriculum?
Yes, we met on March 8th. We had a presentation that reviewed our required curricular changes. Basically, the state wants us to go to more of a format that will be chart-based to show additional differentiation between low, medium, and high, novice, intermediate, and advanced. We'll see that in world language. We also spoke about performing arts, being proficient, accomplished, and advanced as evidence of learning, as another form of growth. We talked about how they want our standards to be critical. They want our students to be critical thinkers, and they want basically they want the curricula to be a layered effect. And this is all coming from the state. So what they're looking to do is curricular writing is going to get started shortly, and we will be receiving it by mid-August for board approval in September. They're going to have hopefully everything done for us by that time. We also discussed business department curriculum adjustments. And I know we're going to have another follow-up conversation about that. We discussed scheduling timelines. Mr. Principe is provided Pat with a schedule of events that will take place for elective choices for high school students and 8th grade students, preparing to get information to the counselors, to meet with, especially with the 8th grade, the incoming 9th grade students. The development of the master schedule will be done May through June, and hopefully with distribution of schedules in June, towards the latter point of the month. We also discussed March 31st, as Pat mentioned earlier, professional development update, and testing schedule from the state. We know that there's still conversation going on about that, but they haven't given us a date, Pat. There's nothing new since then, correct? Okay. And that's about it for curriculum. It was a busy meeting.
Yes, it was.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Policy and governance, Stephanie?
And since Claudia and I both sit on curriculum and policy and governance, we met after the curriculum meeting for policy and governance, along with Doug. We reviewed 2 new policies. One is related to giving electronic devices to students, and the other is related to mental health and well-being. Those were not mandated, but they were recommended. We had templates from New Jersey school boards, and we decided to go forward with the one regarding use of electronic devices because there was an element in there that was not addressed in other policies that we already had. So we edited it and have a Riverdale version that will be coming forward probably at the next meeting. The mental health and well-being, as it was stated, we decided to parse out into 2 different policies, and they both will be coming forward. And then we revisited our dress code policy and the regulation that goes along with that. And we pared it down and made it a little more general than it was in the past. And hopefully it will be well received and implemented appropriately. And that will also be coming. So we anticipate, it was too quick a turnaround with all the changes for anybody to possibly have done that. So we anticipate it for the next meeting. But if not, nothing is pending and urgent. We are not out of compliance with anything that we have. And so it will be forthcoming by at least the second meeting we have.
Was the dress code policy recommended by the state, or is that something we just wanted to change?
So there has been an ongoing conversation over the years about, come up a few times about the dress code policy might be a little bit gender biased. It's an application per se. There was nothing that prompted that, but just in the language that was used and the different kind of items. And so we recategorized the language, not really changed the intent, so that it was more encompassing and less pointed to any specific dress.
Got it. Thank you. Okay, let's move into the consent agenda. Do I have a motion, please?
It's Claudia. I'll make a motion for consent.
Stephanie, I'll second.
Okay. And Stephanie, you had a question about something here?
No, I wanted to bring up something when we got to the budget. So.
Hey, honey.
Okay.
So that's a separate item. So.
Got you. Okay. Does anybody have any questions on the consent agenda?
I got cut out. Here, you want to sit here, honey?
Tom, when you're ready, please.
Claudia?
Yes.
Alan?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Doug?
Yes.
Barbara?
Yes.
Joe?
Yes.
Stephanie?
Yes.
And Al?
Yes. Okay. The first vote outside consent will be under number 9, personnel. B, resignations and retirements. It is recommended by the superintendent that the board accept with regret the resignation due to retirement of Administrative Assistant Margaret Cronin, effective June 30th, 2021. May I have a motion, please?
It's Stephanie. I'll make a motion.
Okay.
Doug, I'll second.
Thank you, Doug. Okay. I saw that in the attachment that Margaret was an employee for 20 plus years. Is that correct, Patrick?
It is. Mickey, as she's commonly known as, is the administrative assistant to the principal at the high school. Mickey has been with us for quite some time, and we are experiencing a big turnover in the high school office. And we wish Mickey well. She indicated that she'll be relocating, and we hopefully will have the opportunity, as I've mentioned a couple of times before, to honor our retirees when we get to our June meeting.
Thank you. Tom, when you're ready for a roll call.
Claudia?
Yes. And I wish her well.
Alan?
Yes. I wish her well.
John?
Yes.
Doug?
Yes, and all the best.
Barbara?
Yes.
Joe?
Yes.
Stephanie?
Yes, it'll certainly be a change to people who have been walking in here for a long time, and I hope she enjoys every moment of her retirement.
And Al?
Yes, and much happiness in your life after Riverdale. Okay, the second vote will be under 11, miscellaneous. B, it is recommended by the superintendent that the board approve board goals and corresponding action plan. Goal 1, by September 2021, the Riverdale Board of Education will approve a plan to fully resume in-person learning opportunities for all students that includes improvements to building security that limit unauthorized access to the facilities. Goal number 2, by September 2021, the Riverdale Board of Education will implement enhanced mental health supports that address the challenges of transitioning from hybrid learning to full-time in-person instruction. May I have a motion, please?
Stephanie, I'll make a motion.
That's Claudia, I'll second.
Alan, I'll second.
Claudia, I got you first. Does anybody have any questions or
It's
concerns?
Stephanie. I have it's more of a comment necessarily than a question.
Okay.
Pat, in seeing how much technology everybody has done and some great videos that people have done, we have a lot of substitute teachers, and we always get new ones, and we of course appreciate all of them that come into our building, whether now or in the future. Do you think maybe there could be like a short video, even if it's like a locked access, that could let people know about like the procedures for fire drills and for lockdown drills? Like if you're not a regular fixture in the building, you may go months without that happening, but when it happens, you might not know what the sound is going to be like, or, I mean, it could be a 5-minute thing. And then like, to companion with the paperwork that I assume everybody gets when they walk in, and to, ensure that they know that they should have like paper rosters and all those kind of things for any unexpected circumstance.
Yes, that's easily doable.
Thank you.
Anybody else have any questions or concerns about the goals? These are short-term goals. We have decided as a board to address long-term goals at the beginning of the school year in September. So Tom, when you're ready for roll call, please.
Claudia?
Yes.
Alan?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Doug?
Yes.
Barbara?
Yes.
Joe?
Yes.
Stephanie?
Yeah.
And Alan?
Yes. Okay, the third vote is under number 12, Finance and District Operation, E. Be it resolved to approve a school district preliminary budget for the fiscal year 2021-2022 school year for the submission to the Executive County Superintendent's Office as follows. Tax levy of 32 million plus, which is 1.4%. Current expenses 34,833, 369. Capital outlay 410, 287. Special revenue 451. Debt service of 137, 400, with total expenses at just over $37 million. Capital reserve withdrawal, other capital projects, which basically would be the two security vestibules, one in the high school and one in the middle school. May I have a motion, please?
I'll make that
So
motion. This is Joe.
Thank you,
I'll
Joe.
second.
Thank you, Alan. Does anybody have any questions on the budget?
So it's Stephanie again. I had brought up this the first time I was on the budget committee, and everybody got to experience what that's like instead of just Tom. So, but I had brought it up to the budget committee and wanted to bring forward to the board. It doesn't change anything that we're voting on tonight, but in the budget, there is contracted services for mental health supports that are in part for school clearances and in part for in-school supports for students that need that outside of the regular staff that we have. And I asked Pat to give an estimation of the number of school clearances that that service kind of provides, which for every student that is able to do that in this building, it does have a very great impact, but we have to sort of weigh that against how many students we could serve if we hired somebody as a regular staff member to serve purposes as for mental health supports and other initiatives coming forward. So while this is a short-term goal that we just talked about, I think both schools and the district is moving in a direction in which that a person could be impactful not only in a therapeutic way for the student staff, but also to support the other curricular and staff members that are moving these initiatives forward, and as it becomes more part of the everyday curriculum in all classrooms. So my suggestion is that we think before we sign another contract for the coming school year, that we think about pivoting those funds towards a staff person. And I realize that will come with an additional expense of, if we have a staff person, there's benefits and all of that. So it's not necessarily a 1-for-1, but I wanted everybody to give that some thought before we move forward. And again, it doesn't really have any bearing per se on what we're voting on tonight, but since it is part of the budget, I wanted to kind of throw that out there. Maybe when we talk about the budget again, or people can respond to Joe, who's the chair of the finance committee, as towards their sentiments on that.
Sounds good. Anybody else have anything on the budget? Okay, Tom.
Hey, Tom. Just real quick, it's Claudia. I'm sorry. For the capital outlay projects, if there's a chance we don't do these, we don't get like penalized or anything, correct? Because this is coming out of our capital outlay.
No, you don't get penalized if the money falls back into capital reserve.
Right. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Tom, are you ready?
Claudia?
Yes.
Alan?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Doug?
Yes.
Barbara?
Yes.
Joe?
Yes.
Stephanie?
Yes.
And Alice?
Yes. Okay, that moves us into old business, new business.
If I could, Al, this, I don't know if it's old, new, it's really, I guess, new. I'd just like to, I guess, give a shout out to our principal, Mr. Pepe. As someone who, as you know, my last child has graduated already, and being up here a lot during the school year in the past and all too. I must say it's been really nice to see some of the emails that have been going out about some of the things that have been going on in the school, and also his Twitter account and all too, accentuating a lot of the positives that's going on. So I really do appreciate what he's hit the ground running, and just like to say thank you.
This is Stephanie. To piggyback on what Joe was saying, it was nice to see that picture of the person who is going to, I believe, the National DECA competition, right? And that's a fairly new club for us, or competition for us. And so it was wonderful to see the student, and I'm sorry that I believe it was a gentleman, that his name is escaping me at the moment. And so, Pat, did you announce it? Okay, so maybe next meeting we could just announce his name, but that was a really great thing to not only hear, but to have a little visual to know the student, and so yeah, I appreciate that too. Did anybody get to hear the tri-M? I wasn't able to. Wasn't that the other night? I'm sure it was wonderful. It always is.
I did not have a chance.
I'm sorry, let me check. All right, I'm unmuted. I'm sorry, I was checking on that name. Tri-M did a wonderful job, and I have to, we've done this before, but giving a shout out to Mr. Wilson for all of his efforts to make sure that the students have an opportunity to display their talents in a way, despite, if you will, the pandemic and what's going on. So some of our students performed, if you will, kind of live, and some of them submitted their through video. It was just another wonderful example of our students moving forward.
And if I could, and I may mispronounce the name, but it was Tanoon Mirza.
Thank you. I can stop looking.
Yep, no problem. I did bring up my phone, sorry.
Okay.
But I wanted to make sure.
I'm glad. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Okay, does anybody else have anything new or old? Okay, we'll move into public comments on any issues pertaining to Riverdale District. Mark will facilitate if there are any questions or comments from the public.
Yeah, please raise your hand. It seems like we have no comments.
Okay, I guess we'll make a motion to adjourn. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion. It's Claudia.
And second,
I'll second, Stephanie.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. 10 o'clock, 10:01.
Bye, guys. Be safe.
Thank you.